Howdy, howdy, folks. Welcome to Module 3 of Psych 652. Today, we're going to be talking about some data wrangling techniques and a little bit on how to use ggplots. So data wrangling techniques are essentially how we can manipulate our data set so it's easier to read, or creating new variables that we can utilize. And then the ggplot will be just for visualizing data. Now, the way that we're going to learn how to wrangle data is all through something called the tidyverse approach. We're going to be using all of these functions that come from the tidyverse package, and specifically, we're going to be using 5 different functions. Those functions that we'll be using are called the filter function, select, mutate, arrange, and summarize. And they'll all have unique aspects to them. So I got a lot to cover and a little bit of time to do it, so we're going to try and get through this as quickly as possible. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. All right, so the first thing we're going to do, and how I'm always going to start these classes, is going to go ahead and open up our studio, and we're going to create that new project that we talked about last week. So go ahead and create the new project, which is up here, that plus sign with a Q. You're going to lead it to that folder that we tried to create before, where mine is in the Psych 652 folder that I created, and you can see that I have module 2 there. We're going to create a new R project folder, and we're going to call it module_03, create project, let it load up. There we go, and just to kind of prove it to myself, I went ahead and there it is, module 03. The next thing we want to do is go ahead and let's go ahead and put a data set in here, because we know we'll always be working with data in this class, right? So let's go ahead and put a data set in there. So we're going to be working with the gapminder data again. In order to get to that data set, you go to modules. It'll be available in 2 different locations. You can go to module 2 introduction to R and R Studios there, or you can go to the module 3 lab, and it'll be available there too. Go and click on it, download the CSV file, click on the there, and I'll show you the save as method. You get a file, save as, browse, and we're going to go ahead and browse to that desktop folder that I had, Psych 652, module 3, and go ahead and save it in there. All right, we can go ahead and exit out of this. We can just kind of prove to ourselves that we got in there. This is Psych 652, module 3. Yep, we got our data set. It's a gapminder data set. And then additionally, go back to our R Studio, and bam, we have a new CSV file that's within our file path here. Perfect, exactly what we're looking for. So now I'm going to go ahead and let's go ahead and create a new R notebook. Go ahead and create a new R notebook. Go ahead and delete all this unnecessary text. And let's start off by titling our notebook, right? It's always good to have a good title in our notebook. So let's go ahead and name this Gapminder Data Wrangling and Visualization. That's what we'll be doing in this notebook today. And we'll go ahead and create a table of contents. So remember, to do this table of contents, you work in this YAML header. You go to the beginning of HTML notebook, you click Enter, Tab, colon, Enter, TOC, colon, space, yes. And let's go and just save our notebook so anything won't happen to it. We'll just name this module 3 notebook and go ahead and save. All right, so we go ahead, and the first thing we're going to always do is we're going to load any packages that we plan on utilizing in this session. So I name it load libraries, and then we go up and insert a new R chunk. Now the only package we're going to be using is the tidyverse package here. So in order to load up the tidyverse package, you go library, tidyverse, go ahead and press play. There we go. I went ahead and loaded up. Now let's go ahead and read in our data set. So we go read in data, and it's new header. Go ahead and insert a new R chunk. And let's go ahead, and again, how this works is you name an object, it's called GM, use your assignment operator, which is a lesson symbol and a dash. We use the function read underscore CSV, and then in quotations, we name it exactly what our CSV file is. So it's gapminder.csv. Go ahead and load that up. So go ahead and press play, and we're going to see that it'll show up in our environment if we did it correctly. And it looks like we did. We got our column specifications. So we have 6 variables with 1,704 observations and a new object called GM. We can go ahead and click on it just to confirm that it all worked out. Yep, looks like we got 6 different variables and 1,704 observations. This looks like it read incorrectly, so we're in a good place. All right, and I'm going to go ahead and just save again. All right, so now that we've got our notebook kind of set up for us, we're going to go ahead and start talking about what these tidyverse verbs are that I keep talking about. And I'm really excited to tell you about them because they're super great. So we're going to start off with using one verb. It's called the filter verb. So let's go ahead and just create a header for this before we get started. So we're going to say hashtag space filter the data set. And so what we're going to be doing with this filter function is we're going to be eliminating rows from our original GM data set. So rows are essentially all these over here. So you see it has 1,704 observations. That's 1,704 rows, essentially. And we're going to be reducing it based on certain aspects of the data set. We can reduce it by year, reduce it by continent, life expectancy, whatever we're interested in. There's a lot of capabilities of this filter function. So let's go ahead and write a note for ourselves. The filter function allows you to filter your data set by rows. All right, so that's what we'll be doing with our filter function. And I'm going to kind of show you how this filter function works. And really, we're going to see some consistencies with our filter function and how all of our other functions or verbs work. So let's go ahead and create a new R chunk, and we're going to be practicing the filter function a little bit. Now I'll tell you, throughout all these, I'm going to be creating a lot of different objects, and that's because we're not going to want to save over our GM object. So we're going to be using that kind of assignment operator and putting an object to the left of it a lot during this lesson. And you'll see that this on our global environment is going to build up pretty quickly. We're going to have a lot of different data sets. And again, that's because we don't want to write over our original GM data set. So let's go ahead and start off by creating a new object. We're going to name it filter1. And we're going to use our lesson sign dash to create that assignment operator. And then we're going to go ahead and just dig into what the filter function is. So we'll use a filter. Now the way that the filter function works is the first thing you're always going to do is indicate what is our data set. So we use filter, and our data set is the GM data set. We use a comma, and then we indicate, well, what do we want to filter by? So let's say we're interested in getting all of the years that are after 1970. So we don't want 1967, we don't want 1962, we only want years after 1970. Well, we have this variable called year. So what we say is, give me any year that is greater than 1970. And what that's going to do is if we go ahead and run this, it's going to give us any year that's in greater than 1970, so past 1970, so 1971, 1972, and so forth, and save it into a new object called filter1. So we go and run. Let's run the selected lines. So we see here that we got a new object called filter1. You'll see it has 1,136 observations as opposed to 1,704 in our original GM data set. And look at that. There's nothing below 1970 in our data set now, whereas our original GM data set did have those different years there. So we went ahead and we successfully did that. You can go ahead and write a note saying we are filtering to years after 1970. Additionally, what if we want to filter by, continent? Well, this is a character variable, so it's going to work a little bit different, but you'll see that the same aspects kind of apply. So what if I want to filter things where my continent is equivalent to only Asia? So let's go ahead and filter it out to only continents that are equal to Asia. So, same thing we did before. Well, let's go ahead and write a note. So we'll say we are filtering to only Asia continent. So let's go ahead and create our new object. We're going to name this filter2. Go ahead and use that lesson sign dash for an assignment operator. Then we use the filter function, parentheses. We indicate our data set. And now we want to indicate, okay, we want it where continent, and this is where it's a little bit tricky. We put two equal signs. Think of it as is exactly equal to quotation marks Asia, the capital A-S-I-A, because we want it to match exactly how this is before. So what we're saying here is we want to create a new object called filter2 that filters the GM dataset to where the continent is exactly equal to Asia. And if we go ahead and run this selected line, run selected line, we're going to have a new object called filter2 that has 396 observations. And as you can see, the only continent we have in here is the Asia continent. So we successfully did that. Let's mix it up a little bit. Let's make things a little bit more complicated. What if I was only interested in getting people in Asia and when the year is equal to 1972? So it's a very specific criteria, right? Well, we can combine things using an ampersand. And I'll show you that. Let's go and write a note first what we're doing. We will filter so there is only Asia continent and, let's go ahead and capitalize, and the year is 1972. So let's just say for whatever reason we're interested in the continent of Asia in 1972. Let's go ahead and create our new object. We'll name it filter3, lesson sign dash. Then we're going to do the filter, indicate our data set, which is GM. So now let's start off. So we want to start off by saying our continent is exactly equal to Asia, in quotation marks. Then we can use an ampersand to say also, and we want the year to be exactly equal to 1972. Notice I don't need quotation for 1972 because that's a numeric variable. If we go ahead and we run this, we're going to have a new filter of 33 observations and as 1972 only. So as Asia in 1972 only. Great, we went ahead and did that. So it's a very specific data set. Let's say we're interested in getting only Asia and Europe. We are interested in when this is either Asia, our continent is either Asia or Europe. We don't want Africa, we don't want the Americas, we don't want Oceania. We're only interested in Asia and Europe. Well, we can go ahead and use something which is an OR operator. So let's say we only want Asia or Europe. So let's go ahead and do filter for our assignment operator. We use filter, parentheses, indicate your data set. Now we're interested in getting it where continent is exactly equal to Asia. And now we want to indicate that OR. So how do we get that OR Europe, right? We want to use this something called an OR operator. To get to your OR operator, you do shift and it's / and it's that straight line. And if you're confused on where to get that straight line, it's shift and it's the button right above your enter sign. And that's called an OR operator, or also called a pipe. If you are familiar with kind of programming languages, they oftentimes call that a pipe as well. Do continent equals is exactly equal to quotation marks Europe. But when we do it in this fashion, go ahead and run the selected line. We're going to have a new object called filter4 that has 756 observations that only has Asia and Europe. You'll see that only Asia and Europe exist in this data set. We don't have Americas, we don't have Oceania, we don't have Africa. Just Asia and Europe. And let's do one more thing that I want to show you. Let's say I'm interested and having everything except Asia now. I only want every continent besides Asia. Asia, for whatever reason, does not fit my criteria. So we say we want every continent except Asia. So how would we do that? Well, filter, luckily, knowing this, has an operator that'll tell us that we want everything except a certain function. So we're going to go and go to filter 5 is an assignment operator. It's a filter function, indicate our data set, comma, make it where continent, and here's where it gets fun, is an exclamation point and an equal sign to say not equal to, quotation mark, Asia. And then when we use this exclamation point with the equal sign, what it's going to say is give us everything except for Asia. So when continent is equal to Asia, we don't want it. Throw it out. Let's go and run that. So now we have 1,308 observations. And as you can see, Asia no longer exists within our data set, which is exactly what we asked it to do. Okay. So now I'd just like to point out, if you're interested, there's a lot more operators that kind of fit in here that you can use. You can use greater than or equal to, less than or equal to. You can find missing values. I have a kind of a nice sheet up on Canvas that I wanted to direct you to. I know somebody during lecture asked, hey, is there like a tidyverse cheat sheet anywhere? Well, I went ahead and created a tidyverse cheat sheet that I was hoping that you all can use. So if you go to your modules and you go to module 3, I have a tidyverse verbs cheat sheet that I created for you. So if you want to know about more of these kind of what we call them logical operators, I have a sheet that gives you kind of everything that you'll need to know about the filter function. And it also has information on all of the other functions that we'll be using. So after this video, I'd really suggest you take a look at this cheat sheet that I created for you. And hopefully you'll find it useful. And if you have any questions about it, go ahead and just send me an email, find me on Teams, and we'll have a chat about what you're confused about. And we can make sure that this sheet is as useful as possible to you so that you can use it for these tidyverse verbs that we'll be using. Okay, so now that we've kind of gone over that, we're going to learn how to now select variables. So our next verb is select. So let's say select, oops, if I can spell, select the data set. So what select does is before we were filtering by rows, now we're going to filter by column. We're going to be removing columns now. So let's go and say select, if I can spell, allows you to filter by column. All right, so we're going to go ahead and create a new R chunk so that we can run executable code. And you're going to see that this select function works very similarly to the filter function actually. So let's go ahead and create our new object. We're going to name it select1. We're going to use an assignment operator. And then we're going to type in the function select with parentheses at the end of it. And from here, what we're going to do is going to indicate our data set. And all we need to do here is we're going to select what columns do we want. Let's say, for example, we're only interested in getting country, year, and pop. So I only want country, year, and pop. I don't care about these other variables in this data set. All you have to do is after you indicate your data set, you type in all the variables that you want. You say country, comma, year, comma, pop. And if we run this, we're going to create a new object called select1 that's going to run, and it's going to only have 3 variables in it as opposed to the 6 variables in our original GM data set. So as you can see, we have a new object called select1. It's got 3 variables in it, country, year, and pop. No other variables in it at all. So we remove those variables, which is exactly what we're looking forward to. So let's go ahead and write a note about what we just did. Select only the variables country, year, and pop. Now, what if I wanted to just indicate variables that I wanted to remove? What if it's just a little bit easier to just indicate variables that I want to remove? Let's say I had 500 variables, and I only wanted to remove one of those variables. Well, to do that, let's go ahead and create our new object, and then our function, and then we indicate our data set. To do that, all we do is indicate a minus sign in front of the variable that we want to do. So let's say we want every single variable in this data set except for country. So they say, nah, we don't want country. You know what? Let's just go on even more. Let's go a little bit crazy. Say we don't want continent either. So within our data set, what we're going to do, so our GM data set, we're going to remove these two variables from our data set with this line of code because we just put this simple minus sign in front of the variable. Go ahead and run that. Now we have a data set with 4 variables, and as you can see, country and continent have disappeared. Voila! Exactly what we wanted to do. So we're going to say select variables that we don't want. And ignore my weird spelling. Oh, actually I do want that capitalized. And that's all you got to do. And that's really all there is to the select function as well. I'll show you another trick, and I'll say we can also use select to organize our data set. This one, if it's a little weird to you, don't worry about it, but I think that this is really useful. Sometimes when I get data set, it's in a weird order, and I like to have certain things in a certain way. So let's go and do select 3. Use our assignment operator. We use our function. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to rearrange this data set. I'm going to go ahead and bring continent so that it's in front of country, and I'm going to keep all the variables in the data set. I just want to rearrange it. Sometimes this is great if like you have an ID number that's near the end of the data set and you want it near the front because you want to be able to see your IDs or something like that. This is a really useful way of doing it. So the way that we're going to do that is we indicate our data set, so it's GM, comma, and then we're going to go ahead and bring we're going to type in continent, comma, and we want to retain every single variable within this data set. So we're going to use a function called everything. This comes from the tidyverse package. And what you do here is it's saying, I want you to select from the GM data set. I want you to bring continent to the front and then keep everything exactly how it was after that. So let's go ahead and run that entire line of code. Run that selected line. So we have a new thing called there, new object called select3. It has 6 variables. Go ahead and click on it. And as you can see, continent and country just switch places here. Because I just use that everything function to indicate that I want to keep every single variable there. And that's really all there is to the select function. There's a lot more things you can do with it, but you'll have to do some online searching. If you want to learn some more of the capabilities, we can definitely have a chat about it. I can tell you some more. I would love to tell you more about the select function. And same with the filter function, has a lot more capabilities as well. So we're going to go ahead and move on to our next function, or as I call them, verbs. And our next one's going to be the mutate function. This one's a little bit harder to grasp for people every now and then, but let's go ahead and see what we can do. We're going to say mutate the data set. All right, so we're going to go ahead and we're going to say what the mutate function does. And what the mutate function does is it manipulates your variables and creates new variables. So we can add variables together, we can multiply variables together, we can divide them together. There's a lot of different things we can do. We can just add 10 to to the variables as well. It's got a lot of different capabilities, and I'll show you a couple of them as well. But really, you use the mutate function to create new variables or to rewrite over existing variables, but most oftentimes we'll be creating new variables. So let's go ahead and say we use the mutate function to create new variables or modify existing variables. And let's go ahead and start working with it. So we can go ahead and create a new R chunk. And you're going to see that with my consistency, I'm going to be creating a new object called mutate1. Use our assignment operator. And we're going to use the mutate function. And again, first thing we do is we indicate our data set, which is GM here. And then let us go ahead. Let's look at our GM data set and see what we can manipulate here. What if, just for the sake of trying something new, let's create a new variable where we multiply population by GDP per capita. You know, this is kind of a senseless thing, but we just want to create a new variable within that. We're going to name this new variable pop GDP, okay? So what we do is we think, what do we want to name our new variable? We want to name it GDP pop. Let's go ahead and capitalize this P so it looks a little different. So GDP pop. Then we use an equal sign to indicate that we have a new variable called GDP pop. And what that variable is going to be the product of GDP and population. So we'll do let's go ahead and GDP per cap, I believe it is. Let's go ahead and confirm there. Yep, GDP per cap. And to multiply, we use an asterisk multiplied by pop. And if we go ahead and run this entire set here, we're going to get a new object called mutate1, and it's going to have 7 variables in it. Yep, we have a new object called mutate1 and it has 7 variables, the same amount of observations. Go ahead and click on it. All that is the product of this and this. So we have a new thing called the combination of GDP and population. And really you can do a lot with this. You can divide them together by using a slash. You know, if you run that, then it'll create a new variable that's the a division of these two together. And you can see it's in scientific notation. Additionally, we can add them together if we wanted to, or even subtract them. You just use a plus sign, and it'll add them together. See, just added these together. We can also just go ahead and let's go ahead and create a new one, mutate2. We can add some sort of constant to all of these as well. So we can say mutate GM, comma. Let's go ahead and create a new thing. Let's go ahead and create a new variable where we just add 10 to life expectancy. We're going to add 10 to every single variable in this life expectancy. So all we do, and we'll say it'll be life exp 10, just to indicate we added 10 to it. Equals. So our new variable is going to be called life exp 10. We say life exp plus 10. And all you do, you go ahead, let's run that line of code. We have a new object called mutate2. And when we run that, all this did is you look at this, it says, oh, they're at 28.801 plus 10 is 38.801. And it'll do that for every single row. All you do. So we added some sort of constant. And it's really great because there will be times in this class where we're going to add some sort of constant to make results more interpretable. So that will come in handy. And like I said, we're going to be using these functions quite often, so you can get more and more practice with them as we progress through the class. So we can go ahead and write notes about what we did. You do hashtag, say, add GDP per cap and population into a new variable called GDP pop. And then here we just say add 10 to life exp into a new, let me go ahead and my hashtag variable called life exp 10. Perfect. And there's a lot more that you can do with the mutate function, but really all you're doing, the main things is you're creating your mutate function, indicating your data set, then you're indicating what your new variable is going to be called, an equal sign, and then whatever kind of mathematical operation you want to do, whether that be combining two variables or just adding some sort of constant to it. Whatever you want within that is really what the mutate function is all about. Let me go ahead and save. Now the next function we're going to use, or the verb as I like to call them, is going to be the arrange function. So we're going to do arrange the data set. Now all the arrange function does is it sorts your data set in a certain way that works for you. So we can filter by continent, we can sort it by continent so that Asia is on top and whatever, I guess it would be Africa would be on top, or we can do it the opposite way so that, it goes in descending order as well. So this one's going to be pretty quick, but what we're going to say is the arrange function allows you to sort your data. Exactly. That's all we're doing with the arrange function. It's just sorting your data so it looks a little bit nicer. Sometimes functions will require you to have your data arranged in a certain way, so this becomes really important. So we're going to go and create a new R chunk, and you're again going to see the consistency in the way that these functions run. So let's go ahead and name this first object called arrange1. We're going to use our assignment operator, and we're going to use the function arrange. And again, indicate our data set, which is GM, comma, we'll go ahead and think about, well, how do we want to arrange our data set? Let's go ahead and arrange it by country. Or no, let's go ahead and arrange it by year. So we're going to go ahead and arrange it by year so that it goes, starts off with the earliest year and then it continues down until it's the most recent year. So all you do with that is you say, okay, I want to arrange it by year. Perfect. All you do, you type in the variable you want to arrange by. You say arrange it by year. Go ahead and run our selected lines. So we have a new object called arrange1. Has 1,704 of 6 variables, so nothing changed there. As you can see, it's 1952. We scroll down, and then we have 1957, 1962, and so forth. We can arrange it by let's go ahead and arrange by continent. So let's go ahead and create a new object called arrange2. Use our assignment operator, our function which is arrange, GM, comma, continent. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's run that selected line. So we have a new object called arrange2. There you go, Africa's first. Go down. A lot of Africas, as you can see, but I think you get the point. And then there's Americas next, and so forth. We can also choose to arrange on 2 variables. So let's go ahead and create an arrange3. We're going to arrange, so you indicate your data set. Let's go ahead and arrange on continent. Then let's arrange by year. So all you have to do is separate them by commas. And what it's going to do, it's going to arrange it first by continent, then it'll arrange by year. So if we run this, we have a new variable called arrange3 that does it all in Africa, and then also it starts off in 1952 and then 1957. So as you can see, it arranged by continent first, then year. And we can switch this as well, right? So let's say we're interested in doing year, comma, continent. You'll see that it's slightly different. So run selected lines. So let's just see what happens here. Okay, well, I guess not much happened here. Oh, there it is. Yeah, so as you can see, it goes by 1952 in the Africa, and then it goes to 1952 in the Americas, and then 1952 in the Asia. So it looks a little bit different than it did before. So as you can see, order matters within this arrange document. And then lastly, let's arrange in descending order. This one's a little bit tricky. We're going to create a new object called arrange4. Use our assignment operator. Use arrange, comma, indicate our data set, which is GM. And in order to indicate that you want it in descending order, you put in a new function called DESC, parentheses, and then the variable that you want to arrange in descending order. So let's go ahead and arrange year in descending order. So if we go ahead and run that, we have a new arrange4. And as you can see, 2007 is the most recent year. And if we scroll down to the bottom, 1952 is the oldest year. So it went and flipped it on us. And that's really all you need to know about arrange is that, you can arrange multiple variables, you can arrange by descending, and you can arrange by, whether a character or numeric, it'll do some sort of arranging for you. Now, our last verb is the summarize verb. So let's go ahead and type in summarize the data set. And all the summarize does is it will simply make it so that you can summarize your data in certain ways. So it'll compact everything down into one way. So we can get the mean of a certain variable, we can get the count of a certain variable, we can get the median of a certain variable if we wanted to. So let's go ahead and say you can summarize the data set in certain ways. And that's all that you do with the summarize. So let's go and create a new art chunk and see, how this works. So we're going to go ahead, and for this one, we're not really going to even be creating new objects. We don't necessarily need to create new objects. This is normally used for just viewing the data. So we're not going to be using our assignment operators for this. But let's go ahead and try it out. So we're just going to type in summarize. And again, per usual, first thing you do is indicate your data set, which here is GM. And then we say, well, what do we want to get a summary of? So let's go over to our GM data set. So what do we want a summary of? Well, let's say we want the average life expectancy. So we want the mean of the life expectancy variable. So what we do is we say, okay, I want the mean of the life expectancy variable. So what do I want to call it? I'm going to call it mean underscore life exp. And then you say equals. You say, I want this new object I'm creating to be life expectancy mean. And what you do is you say, I'm going to put a function within here. One of the most commonly used functions is mean with a parentheses. And we're going to put in the variable that we want to get the mean of, life exp. And I'm also going to tell you within this parentheses, you're really oftentimes going to want to use comma na.rm equals true. You really pretty much always want to do this or else it's always going to spit out errors for you. But if we go ahead and summarize this, we go run selected lines. All right, so now we have a new, what did is it summarized, it said what is the mean of our life expectancy variable. So the mean of it is all these numbers and it just took the average of it. So our average just so happens to be 59.47 is really all it is. Additionally, let's say we were interested in getting the median of it. We can just swap that out from median. Let's go ahead and run median. Our median is 60.7125. Additionally, we get the standard deviation. The code for standard deviation is SD. So you just change that function to SD. And our standard deviation is 12.91. So we'll be going over more about mean and standard deviation later in the class and how we use those quite often. But the summarize function has become a really good friend of yours when you're trying to get certain aspects of your variables. And there's a lot more functions that you can get from that summarize function. And I've indicated them in this kind of tidyverse verbs cheat sheet within this, in which I kind of tell you, see, you can get the mean, get standard deviation, you can get the max of it, you can get the interquartile range, you can get just the number as well, the count of the cases that I kind of indicate within your data set. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how to use this summarize function in combination with a group by function, which is going to allow you to do a lot of unique things. So let's go and change this back to mean to start with, just so we'll have some point of comparison. Go ahead and do that. So our mean is 59.474. So let's create a second level header, so 2 hashtags, and we'll say group by and summarize. Group by and summarize go really well together. And what we're going to do is show you how to group a variable first and then summarize it. So we're going to be able to group it by year and then summarize by year so that we'll be able to get the mean of the life expectancy for each year. So the way that this works is we have this function called group underscore by, and that indicates that you want to group something by some sort of variable. So we're actually going to go ahead and save this into let's do gm grouped. We're going to create a new object called gm grouped. We're going to use less than sign and a dash, and we're going to use a function called group by. And what we're going to do is we're going to group our data by year. Group by year. Now you're going to create, when you do this function, group by gm, comma year, you need to indicate your data set first. We're going to go ahead and run this function. And it's going to create a new data set called gm grouped, which isn't going to look any different than your gm data set. So go ahead and do that. So we have a new data set called gm grouped. It doesn't look anything different, but functionally, what we've done is we've grouped all of our rows by year. So something different is going to happen when we run a summarize function on this year now. So let's go ahead and do summarize, parentheses, we indicate our data set, which is now gm underscore grouped, the one we just created, comma. Now let's get the mean of life expectancy. And you're going to see, although it doesn't look any different, it's going to give us a different result. Equals true. So we're going to go and run this now. And voila. As you can see, it gave us a new, and I forgot to name it. Let's go ahead and name this mean underscore life equals. Now that's just if you don't create that, it'll create kind of a new thing for you, but let's go ahead and run this again. Okay, so we have it. So it's the mean of the life expectancy of every single year. And this is interesting because as we can see, it looks like life expectancy has risen over the years, which is kind of to be expected. And we can even go to the next page and see, wow, we went from a life expectancy worldwide of 49 before to about 67. That's about a 20-year difference there. That's pretty good. So it's really interesting to look at data this way. Let's say I was interested in grouping it by, let's say continent. We can go ahead and run this whole entire set of lines. And now, since we changed the continent here, we can look at it and say, wow, it looks like, so Africa has the lowest life expectancy, and Oceania, so which is would be like Australia, seems to have the highest life expectancy actually. And us in the Americas actually aren't doing so hot according to this. Actually, we have better than Africa, but not as good as Asia, Europe, or Oceania. And there's a lot of different ways we could look at this as well. We can group it by country as well. So yeah, this summarize function works really well when you use this grouped function as well. And we'll go over more of how to use the grouping mechanism more throughout this class as well. So that's a good lesson on all of these tidyverse verbs that you'll be utilizing. So remember, our verbs were the filter, select, mutate, arrange, and summarize that we utilized. And I'm going to go ahead and just check my time real quick here. And I'm just going to pause the video actually. All right, folks, sorry for the break in that video. I just wanted to kind of make sure I was all up to par with everything. So what we're going to do is going to go ahead and start the next section here, in which we're going to be working with ggplot. So a little history lesson on ggplot is that ggplot was created by someone named Hadley Wickham. It stands for the Grammar of Graphics. And essentially what Hadley wanted to do is create an easy way to create, to visualize data and make it look nice at the same time. So what we're doing is working in an accessible way to make really beautiful looking charts that can be used for publication. And this is really where the beauty of R, and in fact why a lot of people really like R, is because of this ggplot package that comes with it. That's really great for making really nice graphics of your data that can be used for publication or even just for your own visual purposes. I use it all the time. I think it's great for just visualizing data. I'm a visual learner, so I think it's really good to kind of dig into my data and then just visualize what it is I'm doing. So I think you're going to have a lot of fun with this package. So the first thing that Hadley wanted to do is he wanted to kind of essentially indicate that there's 3 essential components to the graph in ggplot. Now essentially, I'm going to try and make this a second level header. What Hadley wanted to do is say there are 3 essential components to having a graph. The first is you have a data set. Easy, pretty simple. The next, that you have an aesthetic to map a variable to. And what this essentially means is that you are able to map to either an X and or a Y axis is what you need. And the third point that he said is that you have a geom layer. And that's essentially saying that you have some sort of graph that you are wanting to make, whether that's a histogram or a scatter plot or a density plot or a box plot. Those are essentially the main things. If you have those 3 essential components, you can make any sort of basic graph within ggplot. And we're going to start off by using those 3 essential components to make a graph. And once you understand these 3 essential components, building on and making graphs more complex becomes easier and easier and easier. What ggplot is doing is essentially layering on images on top of each other in order to create a really great looking graphic for you. So let's go ahead and get started, and let's go ahead and create a histogram to start with. So we're going to go ahead and just create an R chunk. And within ggplot, we always start off with the function ggplot, parentheses. All right, so let's go ahead and go through our 3 essentials that we need. The first thing we need is we need a data set. Well, our data set is gm, so we just indicate that by setting in gm, comma. Then we're going to go ahead and set in what's called the aesthetic. And the way you set in aesthetic in ggplot is using AES parentheses. And within here is where you're going to indicate whether you have an X and or a Y axis. Now for a histogram, we only need an X axis. There's no Y axis, it's a univariate analysis. So what we're going to do is go ahead and type in lowercase x equals, and we're going to determine what variable do we want to look at today with our histogram. So in particular, from our GM dataset, I'm particularly interested in life expectancy. So I'm going to go ahead and look at that. So what I do is map this X variable to my life expectancy variable in my data set. So we've got 2 essential parts to this graph. And we can go ahead and run this and see what happens. You essentially get a blank canvas where the x-axis has already been mapped onto. However, we don't have a histogram yet. We have to tell ggplot that we want a histogram. And the way we do that is by adding a geom layer. To add a geom layer, or a layer in general, to this graph, you do plus, and you say, I want something on top of this right now. And what you want on top of that is you want your geom layer. So you go ahead and do geom underscore, and you indicate what type of layer you want. There's geom bar, which will give you a bar chart. There's geom area, which gives you an area graph. There's geom box plot, which will give you a box plot. Or what we want is geom underscore histogram. Histogram. You can go ahead and just press tab, and it'll go ahead and fill it in for you. And what we're going to do is this once blank canvas is now going to have a histogram on top of it. Go ahead and press play, and voila, we have a histogram of life expectancy in which we see what it looks like. We see, okay, it's not normally distributed. Seems like most people are in about the 73 range of dying. So life expectancy for most people, or most countries I should say, is about 73. Now let's say you know, I don't really like the color of this. I want this to be blue. Gray doesn't really do it for me. We can add these things called arguments within our geom histogram label. Let's say I'm interested in saying, I want this to be blue. So we'll use an argument called fill equals. And we can go ahead and type in blue. If we go ahead and type in blue, if we press play again, our graph turned blue. You can turn whatever color you want. You can turn it orange or all sorts of colors. We're just going to press play. There we go. A lot of your colors work if they're all in lowercase. And there's a whole set of colors that you can do. In fact, on Canvas, I think that there's a R color chart somewhere that you can refer to, and it has all the different colors that you can reference in your R color studio that ggplot will work with. We can add as many things to this, but I think before we go into that, let's go ahead and create a scatter plot. So now instead of using a univariate analysis, which we only need one variable, in this case an x variable, we're going to use a bivariate analysis in which we actually have two different variables that we're going to be looking into. So let's go ahead and create a new header that says create a scatter plot. And then we'll go ahead and insert a new chunk. And we go ahead and do ggplot. And we think about what our essential layers are, or essential components are for ggplot. So we need our data set, which in this case is gm, comma. Then we map our aesthetic to it. And then we think, okay, what do we need for a scatter plot? And for a scatter plot, we require an x and a y-axis to both be mapped onto certain variables, because this is a bivariate type of analysis. So let's go ahead and think about what it is we want to get. I'm interested in getting the relationship between GDP per cap and life expectancy. So we'll make GDP per cap our x-axis and life expectancy our y-axis here. So we essentially say, okay, within our aesthetic function, x equals, I believe we want that to be GDP per cap, comma, y equals life expect. And these are two variables that we'll be working with, and we're mapping them through an arguments here. We can go and press play and just see what happens here. So as you can see, GDP per cap shows up and life expectancy shows up onto the y-axis. We can go ahead and add in our geom layer now, geom. And you're kind of asking yourself, okay, well, how do I know what these geoms are? You really just have to kind of learn them over time. But the essential one that we'll be using here is geom point. And I'll try to guide you as to which geoms are throughout the class. And you'll eventually become better at figuring out what they are. In order to create a scatter plot, we use one called geom point. Go ahead and you can click on it if you'd like. And we can go ahead and press play. And voila, we got a cool looking graph. It's a little bit wonky, but it kind of shows what's going on. It seems like it's kind of quite interesting, actually. You would think that as GDP per cap would go up, that life expectancy would rise at the same rate, but it's not exactly what we see. It seems like you hit a certain point that you're up here, and then it starts dropping your life expectancy, actually, which is not what you expect. Well, I think we just need to dig more into this graph to figure out, well, why is this happening? Maybe there's a different story to be told here. So we can start adding more to this graph. We've got our three essential components, but we're going to add more to it. What if I was interested in seeing, well, which continent do each of these little dots come from? Well, if I want to do that, I can go ahead and map it to my aesthetic function and say what a continent these belong to, and I can color it by continent. So if I want to do that, so let's go to our GM. We have continent excuse me, that we can look at by, and we'll go ahead and map it by continent. So we can go ahead and do this. We can do comma color equals continent. So you'll notice that whenever we're in the aesthetic function, we're always mapping something to some sort of variable. We mapped our x-axis to our GDP per cap, our y-axis to life expectancy, and our color to continent. And what's going to happen now, you'll see, is that it's going to highlight by continent now. So as you can see, we have a much more colorful graph. And now it's starting to tell a little bit of a story, right? So we have over here a legend that was automatically created for us. Excuse me. And what we see is that looks like the Asian countries, although GDP goes up, the life expectancy seems to go down, specifically within these Asian countries. However, Europe seems to be pretty high in life expectancy, despite their GDP not being nearly as high as China or Asian countries. And our story can be told. That's pretty interesting. And we can go ahead and add more to this if we'd like as well. Let's go ahead, now that we got this aesthetic here, we can go ahead and add more. Let's go ahead and add a title to this graph as well, which is really great how Hadley Wickham made it so easy for us to add titles. All we do is we add a plus sign, go ahead and press enter, and you type in a function called labs. And within this function, you have an argument which you say title equals, and then you put in quotations, this is my title. And you can even take it one step further and do comma, subtitle equals, this is my subtitle. And if we run this again, we're going to go ahead and create another graph that now has a title and a subtitle on it, which is pretty great. So now I'm interested in getting a little bit more information from this graph. So now I might ask myself, well, I want these continents to be separated out. I want to be able to look at, Africa by itself. I want to look at Europe by itself. I want to look at Oceania by itself, and I don't want to have it all cluttered into it. It's a little bit too cluttered right now. If we want to separate it by a certain characteristic, we can add another layer in there. And using a plus sign, again, adding that layer because it's just building things on top of it. And we can use a function called facet underscore wrap. And the way that facet wrap works is what it's going to do is it's going to separate it based on some sort of variable that we set to it. And we use a tilde beforehand to indicate that. So use a tilde, and let's separate it by continent. So if we run this again, we should get 5 different graphs now. If we run this, so let's go ahead and run this. And voila, now we're able to look at our graph on a different level and see, okay, there's a lot more countries in Asia, and it has that weird trend that we're looking at. We have a lot of things in America, and it seems to follow that kind of trend of, okay, as you go up in GDP, you tend to go up in life expectancy as well, and same with Europe. Africa seems to be kind of all over the place, and Oceania actually is the only one that seems to have some sort of a linear trend to it. What we're looking at here. Notice that our title and our subtitle kind of remain the same. And you can do a lot more with this. I know that Kevin in his lecture showed you how to, scale these as well. You can go ahead and do that. There's a million different types of functions that you can do within this ggplot, but I just wanted to show you some of the basic ones here. Let's go ahead and add in one more chart. We're going to go ahead and create a bar chart. So to create a bar chart, what we're going to do is go back to ggplot. Again, we set what our data is. So we set gm, comma. We set our static function. Now for a bar chart, you think, okay, well, what exactly do I need for a bar chart? Well, I think I only need an x-axis because it's, again, a univariate analysis. So what I want to have a bar chart of? Let's go ahead and just have a count of by continent here. Let's go ahead and say x equals continent. And we can go ahead and run that, and we'll see again, we'll get that just thing. And we see that, okay, we have Africa, America, Asia, Europe, and Oceania here. Now it's saying, what type of graph do you want to get? Do you want for this? You do that plus sign and add our geom layer. And now we're interested in actually this geom bar, which associates right here. Go ahead and do a geom bar, and we go ahead and press play. All right, we got a geom bar. So what we see is that, okay, it looks like Africa seems to have the most number of cases in this data set. America seems to have some, and Oceania would have the least amount, which seems to make sense, Oceania being Australia, so it's not too many countries over there that you would really expect to get much data from. But I want to make this look a little bit nicer too. So again, we can go in this aesthetic function and map it so that our color is based off of what variable we give to it. So let's do comma, and we're going to do fill equals continent. And what that's going to do is fill in these colors, fill in the color of these bar charts based on what our continents are. It just makes it look a little bit nicer. So we can go ahead and just say, hey, yeah, this is a good looking graph. Go ahead and add it, labs if we want to. So title equals, this is a title. Or subtitle equals, this is my subtitle. Woo. And go and run that. And look at that. You got a title, a subtitle, and everything you need for ggplot. But again, I think the main part I want to indicate here is that you have these three essential components associated with ggplot. If you have those three essential components, you will have the bare minimum of a graph. Assuming that your geom layer maps correctly to the aesthetic, you will be able to create a graph very easily within ggplot. Okay, so that's really my lesson for today. And what I have for you on Canvas today is a little worksheet that I can show you how to do. So we'll go ahead and go to Canvas. So if you're at the end of this video, you go to your modules. You go down to Module 3 Lab and find the Module 3 Lab Activity.pdf. Now it looks like it's a lot more than it is. So we'll go ahead and open this up. So it looks pretty long, but I think if you have a good understanding of these tidyverse verbs and so forth, it'll go by fairly quickly. You're just going to create an empty project. You're going to be using this Fandango data set that's here. We can go to the Fandango data set as well. Right here, this fandango.csv is your Fandango dataset. And then I'll also be creating an assignment where it says turn in assignment 3 here as well. Okay, all right, well, thank you so much for listening in, and good luck on your assignment, and be sure to let me know if you have any questions. Thank you so much.